100 Jahre ÖBB.
100 years of Austrian Federal Railways. This is 100 years of progress for our country. 100 years of stability and security. 100 years of safety. 100 years of recurred investment into infrastructure that keeps Austria up and running. 100 years. 42,000 employees set a course on a daily basis for sustainable freight transport across borders for millions of passengers, whose number is constantly increasing on a daily basis. Innovation on the rail, today, for tomorrow, for us. 100 years towards the future. ÖBB. Well, lovely good morning to the press conference for the annual figures 2022. A warm welcome. If you wondered what trains you saw, this is not our new long-distance train fleet, but this is AI assistant generated trains we designed based on the motto ÖBB #Future. So this is a live transmission broadcast from the ÖBB studio here at the Hauptbahnhof. So we're real, and the gentleman next to me, Andreas Mitte, our CEO, and Arnold Schiefer, our CFO, are here real, and they will present the figures for half an hour. And later on, the gentleman will take your questions. And you see, on our website, there is a folder, and you can enter your questions, and this will also be interpreted simultaneously into English. If you do not have the link on our press web page, press.oebb.at, and there under the press window you will find both streams, German and English, and all the documentation in German and English, the press releases. There are two press releases, one on the 100 years and on the annual figures, on the charts, and the annual report can also be downloaded, but only in German. My name is Peter Thier, and I'll be your moderator for today. And now I would like to hand over to CEO Andreas Mitte. Well, I would also like to thank you very much. A warm welcome from the two of us. Well, we wish you a lovely day, a good morning, still morning. A warm welcome to the press conference for the annual results. Arnold Schiefer and I will not only be presenting the figures of the financial year 2022. No, ÖBB is celebrating its 100th birthday this year, and so we took the liberty of taking stock of the last 100 years with a view to some of the indicators we are going to mention. Well, ÖBB was actually established some 100 years ago. You know, the rest is Austria, and this also holds true for the ÖBB. The rest was the Austrian Federal Railways, which in 1922 was then transferred into an independent economic entity with a professional management. And since then, the Austrian Federal Railways have been operating in Austria, facing lots of challenges at the time. And looking at the figures, you can also deduct some of the challenges we faced at the time. And I would like to start with one of the aspects that are important, our passenger figures, which was 122 million when ÖBB was established, and the sudden slump during the Great Depression. Here you see that on the left-hand side. And at the end of the Second World War, the beginning of the Second Republic, ongoing, rather hesitant growth at the beginning, looking at the figures, and then from the turn of the millennium on, you see a massive increase, reaching today's value of 253 million passengers we transport on the rails. And on the right-hand side, you see this sudden slump attributable to COVID-19 in 2020, 2021. We fell to 163 million of passengers during the times of the pandemic. This is the level we had in 1963. So we can very justly say that COVID indeed was a crisis of the century, and I would like to say was a crisis, and use the past tense here. Now, this brings me back to the present. Our passengers have returned, and I believe that we have finally left COVID-19 behind, and we experience a rebound, really. And this is here reflected in the figures. In 2021, we had 447 million passengers on our trains and buses. And let me start in the middle with local transport, 210 million passengers. So we are 8% behind the value of 2019. This was the record year at the time. And here we still notice the changed working situation. We must not forget people were working from home, and this is also reflected in the transport figures here. And in contrast to that, there's a smaller green bar here at the bottom. This is long-distance services. We had 240 million passengers, and this is an increase of 9% compared to 2019, although in the first quarter in 2021 we were massively affected by lockdowns and COVID impact in terms of passenger figures. And bus transport, this is the top bar here, this is more or less on the pre-crisis level. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I believe it is not incredibly difficult to look into the future based on these figures, and I may dare say that in 2023 we will definitely be witnessing a new record in terms of passengers. I'm convinced that there will be more than 480 million passengers using our services, so we will not only be able to celebrate 100 years of ÖBB, but we will also see a centennial record in terms of passengers. We will have the pleasure of welcoming on our services. And this brings me to freight transport, and here the situation is a different one. Well, let's look back in history. So the transport performance, this is weight multiplied by distance, net ton kilometers. We started with 3,575 net ton kilometers, and now we've reached 27,408, and this is an 8-fold multiplication of net ton kilometers, and just expressed in tons, this is a 4-fold multiplication. And this is very positive because this reflects the ongoing increase, and from the 21st century on, we see a massive increase of transport, and this is triggered by the overall opening of the freight market and the massive expansion policy of ÖBB. Let me recall in 2008, we were able to acquire the Russian freight railway. We entered the market in the Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Germany, Poland with our own traction, and we were able to increase performance. And in 2022, we entered the Serbian market with our own traction, and in China too, in Shanghai more specifically, we set up a sales destination. And so we can say rail cargo is and will remain, well, in terms of transport services, number 2 in Europe, and this is a very stable basis. And we are present in 18 countries, and I believe that in these years of crisis, and well, the headline is third year of crisis, and we steer that with a steady hand, and we have proven that we are able to keep Austria and Europe running. So be it in terms of the supply crisis we faced with in terms of agricultural products, Ukraine, we transported 1.2 million of grain from Ukraine. We have more than 100 trains per month, more than any other freight transport company in Europe. And the crisis when the refinery in Schwechat was not working with our trains, we were able to supply Schwechat and ensure fuel supply. This is what Austrian Federal Railways have achieved. And this brings me to the results of our subgroups. I would like to start with passenger transfer. Well, it doesn't come as a surprise. I mentioned that passengers have returned, so results have returned too. And our result is 158 million EBT, earnings before taxes, and this is attributable to the clear increase, particularly in the field of long-distance transport. We have massive increases when it comes from tickets sold from abroad, and also the factor of Klimaticket, favorably priced climate ticket, and the fact that following COVID, people were fond of traveling again and moved around the countries on the rails. And this result also has to be mapped against the required investment. And we have the pleasure of welcoming lots of passengers, and we require more cars and trains, and we are acquiring these, and in order to be able to invest, we require good and sound results, and this is what we have generated. And this brings me to freight transport. 7.3 million is a positive result, EBT, and considering in the overall European context, we can say that compared with the results generated by our competitors, our results are definitely positive. Why is the difference so big compared to 2021? Let me recall in 2021 from rail cargo, we sold parts to technical services, passenger transport, and so you see this major gap. So this was a one-off effect, and some adjustment of the interest values in rail cargo Hungary also came to play here. Something that is also important in this context is that in the context of the overall COVID assistance, state aid was lower for rail freight transport, also had to be highlighted. However, there's a pleasant development in this connection. The Hungarian state, for the first time, fully approved a single wagon load support for rail cargo Hungary, and also paid that out, and prepared the ground for ensuring that there will be single wagon load transport in Hungary. The Hungarian economy is thus supported, and this is also very positive for us, because this also has a positive impact on rail cargo Hungary's results, and they are positive. And by international standards, this is a very respectable and good result we generated. And this brings us to infrastructure. Well, in fact, this is stable at a low level, this subgroup, but for the first time this year, the result generated is negative. Well, why is this the case? This is attributable to cost increases we all feel, and we feel these cost increases in the field of infrastructure, major investment into maintenance, and one-off effects because of energy. You mustn't forget the electricity market. 40% of electricity has to be purchased on the market by ÖBB. Alongside, ÖBB Infrastructure further promoted its development and expansion program. Via the framework program, we can invest more than 90 million euros and are thus able to continue upgrading and modernizing our railway network, our stations, and also further develop our level of self-sufficiency in terms of energy, and also promote the digitalization of the Austrian Federal Railways. Well, summarizing what I have just said, that in the financial year 2022, again, passengers have returned, very positive. Nevertheless, the year was dominated by several crises, be it the crisis in the Ukraine, highly inflationary economic environment, massive cost increase, scarcity in terms of supply, Well, these are topics that kept us busy throughout the year. Nevertheless, the results generated is 193 million euro earnings before tax. That brings us to the level of the year 2015, and this is sustained result profitability, which is actually necessary at this level. And I mentioned that before, to ensure that we are still able to invest into new locomotives and wagons, because this is the response to the passenger development. And in our point of view, passenger numbers will increase to develop, so we have to meet this demand. And this brings us to another factor that is important for us. We are a highly technical service provider, and services can only be provided by people. And this brings me to our personnel. And our head count is 42,603 colleagues we have employed in 2022, and we are in the middle of a generational change. Last year, 4,900 new employees were hired by ÖBB, and in 2023, we will hire more than 3,000 new colleagues. And we, by and large, succeed in attracting new staff, but an important pillar in this connection is apprenticeship training. By the end of the year, we had some 2,000 young people, boys and girls, undergoing apprenticeship training. And this is a very important factor for ÖBB, and we continue to invest into our training facilities. And another important factor, looking back in history, in 1923, ÖBB started with 112,000 employees. Currently, we have 42,000 colleagues, including Rail Cargo Hungary, including our freight forwarding holding, including PostBus, which then now form part of the group. And in spite of this expansion activities, this is only 1/3 in terms of head count compared to the numbers we featured at the beginning of ÖBB. But the train kilometers these people service has been multiplied by 8, and this is the green line, 463 in the beginning, and now it's 3,727 train kilometers. And this is a brief overview. My colleague Arno Schiffer will go into detail and share the details with you now. Well, a warm welcome from the studio. Thank you for your interest in ÖBB. And as a first slide, just to recall what has kept us busy last year, the fluctuation in the electricity market, up to 900%, gas price fluctuation, oil price, diesel price development, the interest landscape, and also the inflation. And these were the framework conditions we were active in, and cooperation with our executives and staff, we try to nevertheless outperform and generate good results. And what you see on the next page, you can say that this result generate and create a good basis, a sound basis for the future. And Andreas has mentioned it, we have to be able to invest, and considering the huge investment program, 128 billion, including framework plan and investment into trains and cars, this is necessary, and we will be able to generate even more income in order to be able to do our debt and interest service. Well, what does this mean? Over the last 3-4 years of crisis, ÖBB and our colleagues, well, we worked excellently. The integrated group worked excellently on short paths. We succeeded in cooperating excellently. We were able to counteract if there were problems. The model of Austria and cooperation within Austria worked excellently and for stakeholders. And I mentioned our financing partner. This sends out an important signal that we are a partner you can trust in for future investment. In 2023, we had 3.3 billion of investment, and this year, 23, we intend to invest 4.7 billion, and minor percentage points in terms of interest conditions are major figures, so they add up. So we need to be able to send up a signal of trust into the capital market, since the overall sales market, as is the case with every competitor, we have to get our loans from the financial markets. And this is a sign for our employees too. ÖBB is a stable employer, and in terms of crisis, people might consider joining ÖBB, which is a good business model. We are a driver of the energy transition, sustainable, and from a ethical point of view, well, this is a good job too, and this is a message to the taxpayers. And this is what you see on the next slide, and in a very transparent manner, we show how much public funding do we go in ÖBB, and well, public funding is increasing, but our job is to make sure that we use these funds in a most efficient and commercial and economical efficient manner. And since you have been with us for several years, we would like to share this table with you. You see where the money comes from and in what the money is invested. And the message is we got less public funds this year. Andreas has mentioned it in red. This is the single wagon funding in Hungary. This is very important. So this is a role model in terms of modal shift from the road to the rail, and there are two segments in terms of expectations for the future and how to manage that appropriately, and this depends on orders and performance. And maybe you can assist us. Please do not say ÖBB gets constantly more money, but have a look at the services and the contracts, passenger transport. This also depends on the transport services that are ordered in terms of kilometers to be covered, since there is massive orders and massive development and expansion, particularly in the eastern region. Well, it's clear if you order more, then in terms of contract, you get more compensations. And if somebody else had to perform these services, then the taxpayers would have to pay for that anyway. So we show that this has nothing to do with the ÖBB, but this is a fact. And in terms of federal funding in the field of infrastructure, driver is indebtedness and then investment, and in the financing model framework problem, we have 52 million more of funding we have to receive in order to pay for infrastructure development. This is additional input, 129 billion, so this will increase automatically on an annual basis. And we cannot work so efficiently within the group to compensate for the investment we require in terms of construction. There are all sorts of investment models on the international level. There is direct financing, but we have a framework program that is adopted by Parliament, 5-6 years plans adopted by Parliament in advance. So this is good. So we have planning security. So this has nothing to do in terms of how efficiently we work, but this is based on the financing and contractual logics. And what you see very clearly is the public investment make sure that there is this modal shift, so funding in the field of combined transport, container transport, single wagon funding. And the Austrian federal government for many decades has made sure that there's a high level of modal splits. By international comparison, we are in the top range in Europe, and this is due to the fact that we also try to give SMEs the opportunity to use the rail transport and thus fund the container and single load. And from the transport policy point of view, you see roller, and this is the segment we mainly see in Tyrol. Questions, please, later on. Our dear colleague Peter will then share the questions with us generally, so please send the questions to him. But we would like to give an overall and very transparent presentation so that you know what we use our funds for. In the next item, please, looking at how this result can be assessed, there are three good key indicators. Well, first of all, debt increase. You see net debt 29 billion. Well, 25 billion of these are due to parked payments, which are to be paid later on in the field of infrastructure. So 25 billion in infrastructure. The financing model is such that we do not not get an annual compensation for what we build, but we have this long-term financing we agreed on with the federal government, and the rest is subdivided in passenger and freight transport. And here we have the train and wagon investment. And during the crisis, we succeeded in increasing the overall group's equity ratio towards 10%. And this is very important. The equity ratio in the freight transport is with the RCA AG in Austria around 30%. Passenger transport were about 16%. In the subgroup, even 23%. And in infrastructure, this is the area which draws the ratio a bit downwards, because we do not have the classical financing rule. We have the liability to be assumed by the federal government. We have this 5.8%, and this is why we have this below average number. The good news is that has actually increased by tangible assets have increased, so the substance of the group had been increased in spite of the crisis, and this clearly shows that we have not lived on what we have, but that we have generated new substance. On the next page you see the investments, and here Andreas has already mentioned it. Investments, we are economy driver, a motor with 3.9 billion. We are on a record level. This is 0.5% of economic growth based on our old status, which we have to update. And with this investment, we support Austrian economy. We do a lot of regional expansion and development. And then we have the new trains and cars. More than 4 billion will be invested into new trains, wagons and cars in order to be able to manage this boom, this increase in passengers. And alongside we have tunnel, transit link investments. Then there will be a special press conference with infrastructure, because a lot is being built and constructed in the infrastructure field. And all these investments in the future have to be managed within the framework conditions I referred to before. We assume that inflation will be here to stay this year, and this will also have an impact on the construction costs. Construction cost indexes have increased between 8 and 8.8%, depending on the construction and the substance. So construction will be a bit more expensive. Inflation will be here to stay. But in the lead-up, we have undertaken efforts in the field of financing. Last year, the press conference, I believe a colleague from Austria asked, I said we have to be a bit tricky and witty, and we were tricky and witty, but other companies as well, also private individuals, try to use the time when interest rates were still low, and we had taken out credits at that time, so for future investments, and there are some loans included which are then forecasted for 2023. So this helps us this year in order to compensate for some of the interest fluctuation effects. What I also need to mention is that in the investments, and this is important to Andreas and myself, so investment also goes into the existing network. We invest into expansion and new development, but we also have our existing infrastructure, the existing network, and there's some 600 million from this investment block, and you'll find that here, and some 600 million in expenses. So investment into the existing network. We try to make sure that we can go as rapidly as possible, because a good, healthy and sound existing network is the basis for punctual trains. And you see that in other countries they were not so successful, but over the last 10-15 years we have always tried to make sure that our existing networks is in an excellent condition, and we will continue to invest into the quality and safe investment into punctual trains, and we these take preference over new developments. So we are benchmark across Europe in terms of these investments. What we also learned is the new normal is deviation management. The time of 5 years plan is over and out. So 1 year plans is future, and 2 year plans are science fiction in terms of business plans. And so we always have to react if something happens, and we thought that after COVID-19 there would be some calm waters, but then there was the crisis in the Ukraine, then the energy price fluctuation connected with that, and we always have to counteract and react based on the situation, and I would like to use this opportunity to thank our staff, because if we present the figures, then this is the performance of the company in figures, and this is the performance of employees, executives and staff, of what they have achieved. And this is also very important in terms of presentation towards own financial environment and taxpayers. So we are in a very stable position, and if we compare that with other countries, then we can say our track record is sound and good, and I hope that it will stay that way in the future. Thank you, Arnold. Thank you not only for that detailed overview of the annual financial figures, and I would also like to thank you for the years we have managed the company together. Let me briefly summarize and also provide a brief outlook into the future. It is the third consecutive year of crisis that went hand in hand with lots of challenges, lots of things we could not anticipate, and we managed that. And I believe we can justly say that we managed it quite well. And from my and our point of view, this is quite a good result we generated, and this result is necessary in order to be able to continue investing and to raise finance and funds in the capital market. And this is a team performance, and the focus is on team, and the teams is undergoing this generational change. And looking back over the last 100 years, you have seen that for more than 100 years we have been a stabilizing factor in times of crisis. And from our point of view, over the last 3 years and in 2022, this also held true. 2023, from our point of view, will even be more challenging, because cost increases have an ongoing effect. Energy prices are still at a very high level. And we will continue to be facing lots of crises, and deviation and crisis management will be the new normal of management. But I believe that crisis management is one of the strengths of the Austrian Federal Railways. Nevertheless, we want to make sure that the future is rosy and sound ahead. So we invest into the future, into our employees. So we are onboarding lots of new colleagues, but we also invest into digitalization. We are still able to modernize infrastructure, because this is the sound basis for the success of the Austrian railway sector, and will be so in the future. And we invest into new trains, because when we actually move from passenger record to passenger record, then you require new trains. So increase in terms of investment 4.7 billion euros in order to make sure that seat capacity can be increased by 2030 by 40%. Because, ladies and gentlemen, I'm convinced that this year we will not only be celebrating 100 years of ÖBB, but we will also celebrate 100-year event in terms of passenger figures. I'm sure that we will be able to achieve 480 million of passengers, which will mark a new record, and still focusing on ensuring safety, punctuality and quality. And this is our main task. Thank you very much, and we look forward to your question. Thank you to Andreas Mattei.